Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'll call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We'll start with Citizens Forum. Anybody scheduled to speak? Thank you. All right. First on the agenda is the 3D Vision Time Overview.
All right, we have a team that is going to help in presenting tonight, but this is actually in the same presentation as the two agenda items. So we'll first start off with talking about our 3D vision time, where we had about 100 staff members come together from all 7 of our buildings to kind of dig into their goals, their action plans, and start their 100-day plan, get their 100-day plan for the fall situated. And so I just have some of the introduction slides. This is one of the things that we really emphasize is our why. It's something that we created last year after going through OSSA sale. We came back and this was one of the things that was one of our action steps of always making sure that this was in front of our staff members, in front of ourselves, on our agendas. And so, there's some common themes with it. The common themes that all of our students matter, that we want to ensure that all students, every student is ensured learning at high levels, that our adults have a collective responsibility in making that happen. And so you can see in the middle is our overall district mission statement, but each of those petals represent the motto or the mission statement of each of our buildings. And so those are some of the things that they have in common. All right, Colton might have to be our Bama tonight. So the purpose of our 3D vision, we have had a 3D vision for about 14 years now. What's happened at the 3D vision may have changed. I mean, the purpose has always been the same, to dig into our data, to look at what that data is telling us, and then to kind of set goals and action steps with it. However, we did make some changes last year, and we stuck with quite a few of those changes this year, a few tweaks, added on some time to our 3D vision because we went 9 hours last year in one day with our 100 staff members. That was a lot to do in one day, so we went to a day and a half, and they had quite a bit of work time, especially on the second half day, to do this work. And so 3D stands for Discover, Decipher, and Deliver. And it's really looking at brutal facts, it's looking at the data, then using that to create our action steps and our on our journey. It's then looking at root causes, the why of why those things are happening, and keeping in that asking of why did that happen, why did that happen, why did that happen, to really get down to the true root cause. And then looking for and prioritizing strategies that really are evidence-based that work. Instead of thinking like, this might work, let's try it. Sometimes it's really looking at the evidence and saying this is a high effect size. This is going to have the most impact in either that academic or that behavioral issue. And then getting into those 100-day cycles, and you'll hear some of our members talk about why we break it down into those 100 days. You probably heard about this quote before, and what insanity is. It's always doing the same thing, expecting to get different results. And I think that's kind of where we thought we were as a team was, we were having a 3D vision, we were doing this work and looking at the data, but we needed to change it up. And you probably are familiar with the game Whack-A-Mole, or Press Your Luck Now is back out on TV, a nighttime game show. And that's really, I think what we found is you're just trying to, if you hit this or you get this, it might work, or if I keep pressing my luck. And we wanted to change that story and take a little bit of a different approach. And that is what we did by participating in OSSA, which is one of our professional organizations. They have this SAIL Academy. And so we were at the 12th cohort, and we are in our second year. And it really is focused on this book by Michael Fullen, who is big with educational change, called Coherence. And it's basically about putting the right drivers in place, focusing on, you can kind of see those quadrants. So if we do all of those things, collaborative cultures, secure in accountability and those things, we really can start to have an impact and be coherent in what we're doing with our 100-day plans.
Okay, so like Jenny had mentioned, we went as a learning leader team to Wisconsin Dells for about 2.5 days and went through this wholesale process. And it is an amazing way of breaking down really that continuous improvement plan and analyzing the data. And we went through all of these mileposts. And so we felt so strongly about this process. We started this last year, we continued it into this year, that we wanted to bring it back to our building leadership teams. And so we wanted to recreate really just a similar process of working through it step by step. And so you can see the mileposts here and how that's kind of chunked up. Everywhere from analyzing data to really identifying just 1 to 2 really ambitious goals, trying to drill down to those root causes like Jenny was talking about, and then kind of putting that into action steps. We, with our building leadership teams, our guiding coalitions, we had the ability to have them for about a day and a half, where we were together for 2.5 days with our leadership team, so we had to kind of break it down a little bit. So some of the mileposts you'll see are in dark blue, some are in light blue. Our learning leader team kind of helped do some of that and set the framework. So some of those mileposts we were able to do with our building leadership team, where our learning leaders kind of helped in some of those other areas. And then you can kind of see the last milepost here really break down kind of the last part of the process, really to create our first 100-day plan and have those action steps. And so when we ended that day, they were able to walk out with their first 100-day plan and action steps around that. And then this is just the agenda here linked in, and it goes really into depth, and really just want to thank our building leadership teams, and it was amazing being able to see the work happening in all of those leadership teams, really drilling down, analyzing the data, the goal setting, and then bringing it back to those action steps and creating those plans. But you'll see linked in the agenda there, you can kind of see how extensive that day and a half was with our leadership teams. The feedback that we got from our building leaders was extremely positive. Everybody kind of walked out like, wow, that was a lot of work, but really ready to like hit the ground running when day one came about.
And then this next slide really just kind of focuses on the work that we do within the PLC process. So it kind of focuses on the 3 big ideas, it focuses on the 4 critical questions, really focusing on those all high levels for all students, and that all means all, so when we're talking about every student in all of our buildings across the district. It talks about the RTI pyramid and what does that look like, as well as what we're tight about in the PLC process. And then this slide just talks about what are we tight about in that PLC process. It's really making sure that we're working in collaborative teams, making sure that we're collectively responsible for student learning across all of our grades and classrooms, making sure that we're implementing a guaranteed and viable curriculum that is consistent across, again, all classrooms and all grade levels, that we're monitoring student learning and making sure then that we're taking that information from those assessments and using that data and those results to then kind of determine what does that instruction look like for our students, including different intervention and enrichment opportunities.
So this picture right here is kind of a metaphor for what happens a lot of times in education. There's lots of different initiatives going on at the same time, and they often get treated like separate, isolated programs rather than something that should be interconnected. But they all tend to share the exact same goal, which would be student success. But when we operate in silos, a lot of times staff feels like these are each separate things that have to be completed, and they can get very overwhelmed by that. So we instead moved ourselves over to a more unified umbrella under professional learning communities with a focus on learning, a collaborative culture, and a focus on results. This ensures consistency, it gets rid of redundancy, and increases student success. Making sure that we're blending our efforts so that we are under one strong foundation.
So during our PLC meetings, we really focus on 3 guiding principles. We're more focused on using data, sharing best practices amongst teachers for the purpose of student learning, and we're focusing on how that outcome actually happens for students. So if they already know it, or if they are still working on those skills, how are we going to actually implement it, ensure learning for all? So with that process, we use 4 critical questions from before, and basically we ask ourselves every time we have outcomes, where do students fall in the continuum of learning? And so the main priority for every single person who's involved in the PLCs is really about the center of student learning and center of focused learning for every kid to be successful. With that then, you have your universal core instruction, and that pyramid is that top tier of, or that top on the left-hand side there, where all of our students are receiving access to that universal instruction. Then we have some students that might need a little bit more practice, a little bit more reteaching, a few more times, and that's that tier 2, maybe those smaller groups or mixed groups, making sure that we're getting access for all of our students. And then an even smaller number, that select few, maybe that tier 3 more intensive direct instruction, that may be groups of 1 to 2 or even smaller, groups of 3 as well. It looks at all of the different areas, so it can be those reading, math, attendance, behavior, all of those areas to make sure that we're focusing on that whole child, while also looking at how can we have that intervention, but also enrichment for those kids that maybe need that extra boost with those 4 critical questions as well.
So Brooke mentioned the term interconnected, and one of the things we really focus on is interconnected improvement. So we look at our district goals and we make sure that those goals are being able to be implemented throughout our system. So that district goals then filter down to the school goals filter down to the grade level or department goals, and then collaborative teams work together to make sure that all of those goals are realized at that micro level. It's a process that really has been shown to be effective. As far as the goals go, we really did key in on a couple of different goals. First one that you're seeing here is literacy and math. And with the literacy and math goals, we really want to focus on, by the end of the year, we want 100% of our students to show growth. I mean, that's like a non-negotiable. We want every student to grow. In 4K through 8th grade, we want to see a 51st percentile SGP, which is student growth percentile gain. And then 9th through 10th grades, we want to see 95 percentile or more growth with the SGI, which is a student growth indicator in the HMH assessment, just to give you the terms what those acronyms mean. So those are in the areas of math and literacy, and that's based on the fall to spring benchmarks. Then we want to drill down a bit further though, because we have students with high risk needs or significant needs, and so we want our students to be able to grow 50% or more of our students would show aggressive growth. We want to see at least 1.5 years of growth for our students who are behind in any of those areas in literacy or math at the 9th and 10th grade level, and at least 30% will show typical growth at K-8 and more than 95% student growth index at 9th and 10th grade on the district screeners in literacy and math. So a lot of words, a lot of language used there, but at the same time, we're just saying we want all kids to grow, and students who have more need to grow will grow exponentially this year.
Simplified behavior, and this is something we've been working on. 2 goals. If we focus on them, we're going to stick to them. We're going to have so much, all of our professional development focused on those areas. So behavior is really to reduce the overall behavioral incidence by a minimum of 10%. We at SAIL dug in a little bit deeper to our previous goal, which was that gap between males and females, and said we just want to focus on our universal instruction. So when we have behavior solutions, we have
really looked at those root causes and then developed the SMART goals for our buildings that are interconnected with our district goals. And then really thinking about, we created action plans that are 100-day cycles to really focus in on what are those small steps that we can take as a school team, a school leadership team, in order to support those goals. And then on September 26th, our grade level teams are going to come together and identify action steps for their teams to help support our building goals as well, so that we're all taking these little small steps and celebrations and wins to meet that goal. So it's really those intentional little steps that will build across the whole year for us this year.
Over the course of the last 15 or so slides, things that we've heard about or we've talked about is establishing that collaborative culture. We've talked about that transition from the silo approach to that umbrella approach. We talked about the transition of that district goal to the building goal to the work that's going to happen on September 26th. So one of the things that we keep in front of all of our teams is the power of the collective. And according to John Hattie, who does meta-analysis regarding, what makes the most difference for students and their learning, anything that would be of an effect size over about like 0.5, if you look on the chart, in that red part of that thermometer per se, is the area that you want to focus on. So we really focus then our work with those teams on working stronger together in those 100-day plans, collectively, how much stronger they are if they're working as a group versus working in that solo type atmosphere. And that is one of the highest effect sizes of any of Hattie's work. So keeping our collaborative teams focused on the right work and moving things forward.
The driving force really of all of this is that idea of continuous improvement and getting better every year, and being better this year than we were last year. Through the sales process, we learned about a particular model of continuous improvement, which is referred to as Plan, Do, Study, Act, as we learn more about that model. But as learning leaders at SAIL, we had to contend with these questions, and then each of the 3D teams at the building level had to contend with these questions, which is, where are we? How did we get here? Where do we want to be? What are we going to do to get there? And how are we going to know if what we're doing to get there is actually working?
So we talked a little bit about the 100-day cycles, and historically in education, what we've done in the past is we've created goals and a plan for an entire year, which tends to be a heavy lift and hard to manage and hard to monitor. So what we do is we break it down into 3 100-day cycles where we can decide what's the one or 2 low-hanging fruit that we can get after and attend to and create action steps around and collect evidence around so we know that we've actually completed that. It kind of keeps that school improvement plan in front of us rather than being put on a shelf. So we're very deliberate about everybody deciding what the principal's going to do, what are the teams going to do to meet those goals, and we go out and we find proof that we're working toward that end. So we do that in 3 100-day cycles, and as we create those cycles, we talk about these 3 questions to make sure that what we're doing is meaningful and relevant. How do you want a better school and district in the next 100 days? What targeted action do you plan on taking to make that transformation occur? And then how are you going to measure that work and the impact that it has on student learning?
Okay, so you've heard about our process this year, so now we're going to take a look back at last year and the results that we achieved through our building goals and district goals. So on the next slide, you will see that the district goals and all of the buildings have their results linked for you to take a peek at, and then each building will go into some celebrations and some areas for growth for their buildings. So I'll start with Fairview and some celebrations that we had at Fairview this past year. included that 81% of our students K through 5 demonstrated that sufficient growth in math, and they also met the achievement goal of scoring above the 40th percentile in Ames Web. Another celebration would be that 100% of our kindergarten students scored at least above the 25th percentile in ELA, which resulted in 0 PRPs for us, or personalized reading plans. We also spent a lot of time as a staff working on student engagement, curricular and non-curricular movement in the classroom, and just using better behavioral practices. So we did meet our school behavior goal of reducing that gender behavior ratio by 25%, and when we looked at the total number of incidents from the year before, we reduced by almost 300 incidents last year. And then another area that we're proud of is that all of our teachers did some PD around building thinking classrooms, and they implemented that within their math lessons weekly, and then they even started to take that structure and implement it into other core areas. Some areas for growth include continuing to focus on reading achievement and growth, and we're going to do that by really focusing on that core instruction, that universal instruction, and then also the targeted supports that we provide in Tier 2 and Tier 3. Our high-risk students aren't making as much growth as we would like, as quickly as we would like, so we're really going to spend some time looking at some stronger interventions for them and focusing on progress monitoring in literacy and math. And then we want to continue to work on behavior and continue to move that in a positive direction by implementing positive narration, clear directions, restorative practices, and then also continuing our goal setting with our students around behavior to promote that positive behavior.
For Glenbrook, Brooke and I sat down and kind of looked at the lows and rows. One of them that just immediately stood out to us was that the 91% growth in kindergarten reading. A lot of times when you see anything with a 90 in front of it, it definitely gets your attention. So we were very, very happy with all the work that was done there. Second grade followed up. They had a 3% growth in math, which again was we were very, very pleased with. And then our fifth grade, 24% of their students were in the 90th or 99th percentile by the end of the year in reading, and 34% of their students were in the 90 to 99th percentile in math, so we were very proud of those. And there were others as well. Those just were the ones that happened to stand out for us. Our behavior, we also reduced our behavior. We specifically were focusing on hands to self, and we were able to reduce that. We had a goal by 25%, and we were able to hit that goal. Unfortunately, that also led to a grow. We didn't really close the gap between the boys and the girls. There was just some side conversations that our girls found out, and they just behaved really, really well. So they didn't get any write-ups last year, hardly. So the gap didn't exactly close, but we were very, very happy. We had some behavior academies and applied some of the PD that the district has been great in offering to us. And then we really looked at like our winter to spring scores for Ames Web. I know like I talked with the board before, especially with like third grade where they have that, and then it leads into the forward exam as well, that, you know, with the whole testing schedule and everything else. But it's certainly something for us to make sure that we're paying attention to, that we didn't really see the kind of growth that we wanted to between those assessments. And then really, I know Brooke and I met with some of the other teams too, and especially with Act 20, like our third grade teachers felt like they really became better reading instructors last year in learning a lot of those foundational skills. So really it's just a focus to continue to apply all of that PD that we went through last year. So those were kind of our growths.
And then for Hillcrest, the first two celebrations kind of focused on our K-1 kiddos. We had 83% of those students in kindergarten and first grade demonstrate growth in literacy, and 85% of those same group of students demonstrate growth in math. We also noticed that our students that were performing at the higher level, 95% and higher, still have some steady growth, which sometimes when you have students at that higher level, it's hard to kind of get them to grow. But we did see some steady growth even with our high achieving students. And then our behavior incidences did decrease by 31% when we compared it from last year to the year prior. So those were kind of our celebrations. And then for areas of growth, like I commented on our K-1 students, had that 83 and 85% growth. Our 2nd through 5th grade still has some good growth, just not to the same level as our K-1 students, so that would be an area of growth for us. We want to continue to refine our Tier 2 practices. That's kind of that intervention win time, is what we call it at Hillcrest. Just kind of making sure that we're targeting the right kiddos and the right skills in each of those groups. And then we also want to continue to further decrease our behavior incidences. And one thing that came out of our 3D vision time and our 100-day plan is really kind of focusing on some of that self-regulation with some of our students as well.
At Illinois, our celebrations are that K-1 reduced the number of students needing a professional reading plan, and we realized a lot of positive growth at this age. There's a lot of learning and a lot of visible learning that goes on at K-1, so we're really proud of that. Our 3rd and 4th grade students increased or improved their forward scores from last year, so we know that there's some momentum in learning at that level. Our behavior gender gaps were closed, and we learned that only 6% of our students accounted for over half of our referrals. And each one of those students, we are aware, and we have a plan, and we work to build relationships and help those students be successful. And all teachers at grades 1 through 5 have utilized that building thinking classroom approach in at least one subject. So we're working on kindergarten this year. I'm hoping everybody has experience with that. Areas of growth, we want to ensure that expected growth is seen in reading in each grade, K-5 consistently. So what we decided to do is hold K-2 and 3-5 vertical meetings once a month, where the K-2 and 3-5 teachers get together and talk about how they teach and what they teach and when they teach it, so that there's seamlessness between, well, now 4K that's in our building, but a seamlessness in learning 4K to 5, where we're actually building on the year prior and not having to reteach. That's our ultimate goal. We want to continue to improve responses to adverse behavior by improving our positive narration and giving precise directions, letting students know what's expected and holding them accountable for that. And as a whole entire school staff, we are reading the 6 chapters in every student every day, and to create that common language and understanding around a really positive and effective behavior management system in the school.
For Sunnyside, I would say celebrations oftentimes for all, but we sometimes get lost in the shuffle of all the work that we do and the work that our teachers do. And our building was extremely proud of the work that they've done into intentionality with the work that we've done especially this last year. We saw great growth in a lot of areas, and we could have more celebrations that we could even put on here. But some of the ones that we want to highlight, 82% of our students showed growth in the area of math. 75% of our students showed growth in the area of reading. We were very proactive in our work around behaviors this past year, and we saw a significant decrease in behaviors of 343 less write-ups this past year from the year prior. And then 56% in reading and 64% of our students in math that were high-risk students had aggressive growth from fall to spring, and that for us was a significant highlight for our kiddos and our staff. When you look at areas of growth, some areas we want to continue to focus on is building on that progress we've already made with our behavioral focus and the intentionality with that. We've spent some time already this year working with staff on that and continuing that work. Focusing, building in clarity within expectations and processes to really support that learning across the building. Continue to adjust our SIT process for further expanding our tools and the resources that we lean on oftentimes for our Tier 2 and sometimes our Tier 3 supports. And then continue to strengthen our Tier 1 instructional approaches to really support our focus on learning and growth. And if we can tighten sometimes those Tier 1, that has a direct impact on the Tier 2, which then directly impacts that Tier 3.
As we transition to the middle school, as Brenda and I worked with our guiding coalition and looking at our data celebrations that we thought that would be important for us this year with everyone is that looking at the cohort data in the forward exam, so taking kids as they come in, transitioning from 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade and all the way through related to forward, they showed improvement in the percentage of kids that were at or above grade level in regards to their board exam. And looking at that cohort data is comparing themselves against themselves from year to year to year. And as we look diagonally, each of those improved. When we looked at our Ames Web data, we looked to see what did we see in relationship to reading. Kids that were from typical and aggressive growth from 2 years ago, we were at 53%. Last year we were at 59%. The right direction. It's improvement. Not where we want to be, but the right direction. In math, we transitioned from 2 years ago from 68% to just over 73%, so a 5% improvement. And a highlight that we had in our Ames Web piece was that 83% of our students in mathematics in 8th grade had that typical or aggressive growth. The other piece related to behavior that we thought would be helpful to share is we spent a lot of time, as Laura had said, related to the behavior goal and continuing to move things forward and improving our documentation and our consistency through the use of our life skills rubric was something that we found definitely beneficial. So what does that mean as we move forward? Well, our goals were, or areas of growth, we wanted 100%. We weren't there. We were at 73 and 59 in math and reading. So we continue to push, and hopefully we continue to see more of what's on that left-hand side of improvement, so we get to that 100%. We do believe that we need some stronger work with our Tier 2 and Tier 3 kiddos, our high-risk students on growing more aggressively. So we're already, moving forward with that with our plans and our 100-day plans. Talked a little bit earlier about collective efficacy, and another term I'll put out there is teacher clarity, and they work hand in hand. So continuing to build on having the right learning targets. What are our power standards? What does success look like in those learning targets? Engaging kids in their learning, and then providing feedback and checking for understanding through our universal instruction is a continued focus for us, as well as working with the behavior matrix, and you'll be hearing more in future meetings about that, but the work that we embarked on this summer and into our data retreat and into our August professional development future one to improve on that consistency through classroom expectations, hallway expectations, recess expectations, etc.
And now we're on to PHS. So we had things to celebrate at the high school as well. So in math, we were actually able to exceed our growth goal for our high-risk students by 11%. That's based on our HMH results, which is how our goal is set within the district and then at our building level. So that's that benchmark assessment we take 3 times per year. So we're really excited about exceeding that growth goal for our high-risk students. In reading, we were able to improve our growth of high-risk students by 10% when you compare how much we grew them the year before, so kind of trying to see if we're at least making that right progress and heading in the right direction. And then in both reading and math, when we just look at the general growth, not looking at our high-risk students, we did grow 7% more of our students on average in both reading and math. So we were pretty excited about that compared to the previous school year. And then also, although we didn't decrease that comparison between males and females with our referrals, we did overall decrease the amount of referrals that were written compared to the previous school year. So that was a celebration for us. But we definitely have room to grow. So similar to what the middle school has shared, our goal is 100% of students growing, right? And that's also our district goal for this upcoming school year. And we did not achieve that, so we're going to continue to strive to grow 100% of our students. Also, because of our focuses for this school year on being targeted and being clear on our instruction and our assessment and having all those things aligned, we want to improve in our Tier 1 instruction, which will ultimately also help us improve and grow in our Tier 2 intervention, which is a major focus of ours for this upcoming school year. And then we've heard a couple of buildings talk about the behavior flow chart, so we all worked on developing behavior flow charts in this week leading up to school. So it's all about getting that implemented and supporting our staff so that we can have consistent expectations in our building, which will ultimately hopefully improve behavior for our students. All right, that brings us really to overall district celebrations. So when we look at all those celebrations as a whole, a few things really stood out district-wide. Most of our schools demonstrated gains really in the area of literacy, and we look at overall 2/3 or more of our students showed growth when you looked at scores from fall to spring. Math was an area of strength. When we looked at our math results from fall to spring, it really surpassed many of the goals that were set. 75 to 80% of our students really showed growth from fall to spring, so that was a great celebration in the area of math. Another population that we looked at was our high-risk students, and there was definitely measurable growth in both reading and math for a notable percentage of those high-risk students. And then lastly, when we look at the reduction in those behavioral write-ups, there was a decrease in that gender disproportionality in some of our schools, but we know there's still work to do around the area, in that area.
And for the areas of growth, you've heard from each of the schools, and because their data is really the district data, when all 7 of those schools come together, it's very similar to what you've heard each of them share. Our literacy data lags behind our math data, especially for our high-risk students, so we know that we have to have a focus more with literacy on those interventions and what we can do for students who are struggling. You've heard them talk about our gender goal that we originally had, which was a 25% reduction. We obviously didn't meet that, but I think it created great discussions, and I think there was some recognition that we probably are faster to notice boys' misbehavior and write them up than we do for girls. Girls are probably a little bit more covert and under the table, and we kind of miss it, or we let things slide. I think some of the conversations we had as well, like, we let girls do certain things that we don't regularly notice that boys are doing. So I think it was a great conversation about looking at our behavior incidents and what we can do with that. And then also, I think you've heard from others that it's just greater consistency with our Tier 1 universal instruction, and then more quality with Tier 2 and Tier 3 as we're trying to support students both in academics and behaviors and meeting those. And then overall, just our high-risk students just needing more support because we're not meeting that 50 and 30% benchmarks that we set for them as goals as well. So that brings us to questions. You got the team here, so if you have specific questions, please ask them and somebody will be able to answer them.
I just have one. I know we talked about the gender gap and all that stuff. How much longer do you guys think that'll be, I don't even know how to say that, point of conversation, right? Versus let's just look at behaviors and the gender of a student is really just a factor of that, a demographic, not necessarily a target. Because I think the risk we run into is if we put a gap out there and we have the belief or the data even to say, well, boys versus girls, this, are we really ever going to meet it? And what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is to do what you guys have all said, like provide corrective action and like behavior, all that stuff. I think if we focus on the gender, especially in conversation, it may be a little misleading. But again, I appreciate this. This is some good stuff. So.
Yes, Larry, you want to take that away, son?
I think that's exactly why we had conversations about, let's talk about this universally, and what things can we teach and practice with all of our students, so that they have that consistency, like Pat talked about, that we're all on the same page and looking for things, because even our learning leader team, and then spread that up to our teachers, we want consistency across the district. So that is exactly why we moved away from that gender gap, because we want to see all students succeed where they're at. Behaviorally, so that might look a little bit different for each of our kids. So you really nailed it, exactly why we moved away from that gender piece and looking at universally, what can we do? Because again, that whole Tier 1 universal, the more 80% or higher, that's what we are looking to hit. And then a couple kids might need that Tier 2, and then a couple more might, or a couple fewer might need that Tier 3. So I would say that's exactly why we moved away from that specifically.
Okay, and just one more question. So when we talk about 100% improvement, what do we do in a situation where we have a student that is at the top, right? It's going to happen. Like they're at the top of their reading. There is no room for improvement. How do we account for that so we don't, because we're not missing the goal, right? we're not missing the goal, but they're also, they can't read better than what they're reading already. So how do we account for that?
Can I respond to that? Because I pushed back very similar to what you were saying, and Lindsay was able to help me understand it better. Same exact kind of conversation or question that you're asking is, when we look at that, it's, let's say a student is at the 99th percentile, and we're looking at what is their typical growth. And you kind of say, well, where's the ceiling there? And what they do, though, is they're comparing, like when we look at that, we're comparing that 99th percentile student against other 99th percentile kiddos, and what their expected growth should be at the 99th percentile. So that what's expected there may look and feel different than someone that's at the 50th percentile or the 35th percentile. You're comparing against kids that or students that are at the same percentile, and what would be the expected growth moving forward from there.
Okay.
So if your 99th percentile goes, the expected growth is really to go up, one grit score. Well, that's what the expected would be then, is one grit score, not 10, because they're stretched.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I just want to make sure you weren't chasing a goal that wasn't achievable, right? So that makes total sense what you said. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Lindsay educated me on that.
That's all I got. Thank you.
So looking at these high-risk students who grew aggressively, first of all, congratulations to Sunnyside, 56% in reading, 64% in math. That's incredible. Those are big numbers compared to what you're lined up against with your peers. High school moved 61% in math as well, so that's awesome. Thank you for that. I do have a question on that same topic, though. Middle school. So what are some specific things? We talked rigor when I was sitting in your office, right? Around how we get these high-risk students to grow aggressively. Your two scores kind of stick out, and then Fairview, I'd like to hear from too, kind of what your thoughts are on those.
I'm going to ask Brenda to respond to that, because she's got we're already moving on it. So
good, let's hear it.
Yeah, I think, we're trying to narrow down to very skill specific and using that data right from day one. So all of our teachers that are in any kind of core instruction are doing our skills block. Now this year we're transitioning to all 4 of them are doing skill-based instruction based on either math or ELA. So it's very targeted, like being able to take the standard, break it down, what is the skill, what is the knowledge that is needed, making sure that they have that before we progress into the next level of learning. So often what happens at middle school is at times, the reason why they're lower performing is they have gaps from prior, right, by attending to middle school, and so we can't teach right at the middle school level. You have to be able to scaffold or bring that learning down to that level, and then bring it all the way back up to the expected grade level standard. So it takes a little longer. The rate of improvement for any kind of kid in the middle school or high school takes a lot longer to close that gap than it does in elementary. And so we're doing that, we're working on that, we're specifically targeting, any of the kids, every day, everybody's working on it.
And so one of the things that Brenda helped put together was, in each grade level for math and for literacy, is here are the kids and here are the themes like number sense in math or geometry, and where their assessments were coming in, like, oh, they met the standard in geometry, but on number sense they were approaching it. And then our teams right now are sorting that and then pulling kids based on those lagging skills, so that, you could have a student that is proficient in, a bunch of things, but not in a couple, so let's zero in on those couple to help move them forward. And so that started today.
So what does that communication look for? You're talking about scaffolding, and if they don't come in with the skills they need. So what does the communication look like from the middle school to all these elementary schools and the 5th graders that they're sending to you?
I think they're by far doing their best that they can, right? I always compare to when kids walk in the door at 4K they're not exactly all the same, right? So our goal is always, it doesn't matter where they are when they come in our door, as long as we're making them grow and or close the gap. So they're doing a great job. Like you look at their math and reading scores, those are highest that we've ever received, right? So those are great improvements as well.
I think one of the things as a district that we talked last year about is the whole Act 20 movement, and then some of the celebrations that the elementary shared. I mean, we are seeing that, and that will be helpful. We're also cognizant of the fact that the kids that are in our portion of the K-12 system were kids that were very young when COVID was here. So we're still dealing with, lagging skills, so we want to, not as an excuse, just as a reality, is having more data and then what we can do with it is helpful as well.
Good.
So those basic reading skills, fluency, we're not just jumping over them, we're still working on them. Phonics, we still have some kids working on phonics, we're still working on them. Never give up on a kid learning to read, that's our philosophy.
One of our, and she was here tonight for the open house, one of our FIA teachers, Vicki Landers, is also a reading specialist. So she's running a group of 18 kiddos, and she started today. And, and all hands on deck.
Awesome. Happy to hear it.
Yeah, as far as Fairview, when I think about these kids, there has been a lot of turnover in staff in this area, staff that provide these interventions. So then with that turnover comes a whole learning curve of learning the interventions that we have available, and then learning our kids and seeing really where their gap is so that we can fit the right intervention with the right student. I think especially in math, we maybe don't have as many interventions available for those students, so it's a lot of direct teaching from those staff members. So I think we just need to really continue to explore those interventions that we have and fill that time for those students with the interventions that will give them the most bang for their buck.
Good. Thank you. That's all I have.
Has Act 20 been completely integrated in everything now? It's our second year with Act 20. Do you see that as a tool to get the literacy growth up with Act 20? Is that going to help us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's just more focus on foundational reading skills or structured literacy skills, and so because of that, we're seeing improvement in reading. At the same time, and there's been conversations about this, that there's also that fear that pendulum might swing too far, and now we might lose that love of reading, because kids are more focused on those decodable books, and so I've heard teachers say, and I haven't been able to do a chapter book because we're focused on that type of stuff. So we're trying to find that balance, meet the letter of the law as well. We still have new teachers and some teachers that we still have to do the training with. So they're running a cohort through this year as well. But we had 100 staff members trained last year, and I think like principals would say, and as Pat mentioned, when we were looking at our goals and how we did, there was a lot of conversation that they felt it still did help and improve where we were at, and we think we'll continue to see that as well.
I think one of the things at the middle level too is, 2 or 3 years ago, we piloted a resource. Last year was pretty much full implementation for literacy with the HMH resource. And I think part of, as our teachers, going back to that teacher clarity or that efficacy piece, as they get better at it, we believe that resource was one of the direct correlations of our improvement. So as we maintain and get even better at it, and with it, that's going to be helpful.
Other questions for the group?
Yeah. First off, I want to say that I think that these numbers, even though some of them people are kind of, I think the teachers are doing a phenomenal job with the amount of time that they get to work on all these skills. I mean, we're giving them a lot of tools. The day is still only so long. So I think they're doing a great job. The one thing that's kind of way out of left field that I see with this, and we talk about middle school and that growth, has anybody ever went through and looked at the data from when 6th grade kids were still in their elementary schools versus in a large setting in school. And is that part of that?
I think what's hard is the assessments have changed so much from when we were in that structure.
Yeah.
To be able to have a great answer to that.
But I just, because I mean, that was the process for years and years and years, and then obviously the middle school came along, and maybe they're not ready for that, But I know that's way left field, and obviously schools are completely different and things like that, but it just, when you look at all the numbers, you see a pretty big dip there, and it's like that jump, I think might have a lot to do with it.
One of the things that does happen, and this will be more of a math comment, is as kids move through a system and they get to that 6th grade and 7th and 8th grade, the math becomes more abstract. And so that is something that we're aware of in relationship to it, but it's different. And I think that's where, that maturity piece and that brain development, and then it's all of a sudden like, bam, as a freshman, wow, I get it, it hit me, But that's also, our 6th graders are the same as 6th graders, and Howard Swamico is anywhere else.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's just, what they assess changes a little bit as you get to those middle levels. But I think that the key is keeping the, the essential skill piece in front, the universal curriculum, as Jenny had mentioned a few minutes ago, getting better at that. And then, for those kids that are not, how do we continue to build them, or the 99th percentile table, how do we continue to build that with the time that we have from 7:30 to 3 o'clock? And that's our business, that's what we do.
And the only other thing I think is really important to understand is the comparison of middle school to other middle school because of that brain development and those changes versus a middle in comparison to an elementary. So, just things to keep in mind.
I think one of the things that we've been cognizant of, because we've talked about, based on attendance areas and some buildings getting larger, so there's been conversations of, do we look at doing intermediate, and I think what always came as a conversation is, every time you make kids transition, you tend to watch scores drop because it's another transition, so we've kind of been against that of, let's do a K3 and then a 4, 5 and a 6, 7, so we've tried to probably avoid that, even though it's been, brought up, like, do we turn one of our schools into that and bust the kids there, because we're fearful of that gap happening and a dip happening.
One of the things I just really appreciate about our structure now is I think by the time kids get to 5th grade, the end of 5th grade, they're ready for something different. And I like that we have we're going to continue with the rigor piece, but we also have a very exploratory curriculum where kids get to try lots of things, tech ed, art, not that they don't have art in elementary school, but there's lots of options for kids to find passions, music and world language and business and family consumer science. And I think when we look at the whole child, that's really important. And I think it'd be hard to replicate some of that in different structures. We're at a good place staffing wise in those areas to be able to give kids good experiences.
Any other questions? Thank you all for your time
Thank
on
you.
this. We really appreciate it. We look forward to hearing the progress throughout the school year.
So this kind of is the introduction to the process. Matt had talked about that continuous improvement cycle, and so we'll be back. We'll show you some of that local and state assessment data and comparable data as it gets on embargo by the state, and we're expecting that to happen sometime, in October, so that allows us to get into it and do our comparables, because at this point we don't know how our scores compare to other districts as well in the FRCC. Then early December we'll come and we'll talk about our first 100-day plans and what our second 100-day plans are looking like at that point. And then somewhere in November-ish, DPR school report cards should be released, so we'll bring those to you on December 3rd as well. And you'll see those district ones and school ones.
Thank you. Anything else? No? Okay, moving on to the 24-25 report card, Future Ready.
Speaking of accountability scores, in that district report card, that focuses so much on academics and scores, and we didn't want that to be our only story that we were telling. And so through the years, it started off with just creating our own little thing, and I think we showed it to you last year where it was on our website, and it had little balloons, and you could click on it. It would be some of our telling of our story and celebrations, and then we moved to the redefining ready report card, but kind of after that, 6 through 12 worked on that. We felt like it still was very much of a focus of academics and not enough of the other things that we felt told our story. And so it started just with 6th through 12th grade. We had our counselors, Janelle Bannon was there, our administrators, and we started to have some conversations of what could really tell our story. And we brainstormed, had flip charts all over, and then centered on some things that we thought were important. And then we said, really, let's include K-5 on this because it's really telling our district story. And so last year we showed you our first Future Ready report card, and this year it's our second one, so 2024-25. And so lots of people in here work to get that data all pulled together, and then we basically give it to Eric, and he helps to put it in a data story of telling that message. And so it's divided up into several categories that we agreed upon as a team. So there's kind of like by the numbers and people and places, and so Mike talked about how many on the milk carton, how many lunches were served, or how many white buses, and how many miles they traveled, and how many students, and those types of things, or how many of our teachers have been Cold Fellowship winners, or Golden Apple winners. And then we move into some of the other things. So there's still an achieve category, so it still does some comparisons on our state report card and where our schools fall with exceeding expectations or meeting expectations. We include graduation rates in there and how our GPA is distributed at the high school level. We're proud of our AP participation. You saw that at the last meeting and all of the increases in the scholars, so we're able to demonstrate that. We really felt the focus on our post-secondary outcomes, so our kids, when they leave by taking those AP and start college now and early college credit program, they walk out of here with credits, and we thought that was an important part to talk about. When you're getting into college, you aren't paying this money because you received that in high school. And scholarships earned, $1.7 million, I believe, was what our seniors earned last year. And so that's our Achieve section. Then we have an Engage section. We're very proud of our PACE program, especially that summer school and adult learning programs they put together. This summer was our highest enrollment in our summer school, so I think he put a nice little asterisk or star to emphasize that on the report card. Our attendance rates are above our co-curriculars and our athletics, 6-12, are amazing, and kids who are involved in athletics and involved in co-curriculars do better academically, and so it's getting them involved in those types of things. There's some life readiness indicators as well as service hours, because kids who also are participating in our community are going to be contributing citizens, and so that's important as well. Youth apprenticeship, we're approaching over 200 students in that program, and then just those career pathways. Then we have an Ensure section, so that gets at our socially emotional learning data and students feeling like they're belonging, but we also ensure our transportation, food service. We have lots of volunteer hours from parents and grandparents and step workers, and so we wanted to highlight that, as well as our booster club support, because we wouldn't be able to do those types of things if it wasn't for our band and our athletic boosters and our FFA alumni and those types of organizations. And then we know that when we're a learning organization and our adults are learning, that means our kids are going to be learning as well, so we wanted to emphasize whether it's Apple Core or self-directed PDL or other experiences that they have. And then finally, we have an alignment, and we're proud of that data on there as well. We're that little radar guide. We didn't put the other schools because Ally doesn't want to have to show up at a superintendent meeting and get blasted by her fellow colleagues that they're listed on our data, but I think you probably can determine who's the better score and less money per pupil, but we're second, and we have, high score based on what we spend per pupil. Mark helps to gather that data, and then we can emphasize that as well, so. So you have a draft of it, and it's up on the screens as well, and it went out in the newsletter today to families, but we haven't put it out on the website yet, but we're looking to do that in the next couple of days here. But again, this is a different way to tell our story that we're proud of besides just our academic scores.
Did we get any feedback last year, Jenny, from the public, whether it be parents or just regular taxpayers on this document?
Sorry,
Did we get any feedback last year on this document?
I don't remember hearing any, but Eric, did you notice anything when you posted it on the website for hits or anything, or is he not here? No, you're, okay. I don't,
Okay,
I
was
didn't
curious.
hear anything. Ally, did you hear anything?
I didn't. I shared it with my Brown County group, and they really liked it, so I think we'll be seeing other districts, kind of doing something similar. And this is always our conversation, we need to stop, we talk about this as a superintendent group, we need to stop being looked at as just a number, and we need to be able to tell our story. So to be very honest with you, I think that parents know our story because we're so connected with them in our schools. I think that if we showcase this in a different way, or we start having board meetings where we've got a packed house and we were showcasing this, I think they would pay more attention to it. But it's, the more we get it out there and the more we tell our story this way, they're not as concerned about if a school struggles, we're not just all about that number.
So good.
I think this is such a great way to share the story because, like you said, it's more than just our reading and math scores. And I think another important thing looking at this also reminded me when we're talking about especially literacy scores, these types of things that you displayed here are how our kids are reading. It's not just a textbook anymore that they take and they open it. And so I think this is just a really good display also of how we have changed in education and how these types of things are what our students and our families now are going to be reading rather than just a typical textbook or something like that. And then to tell our story through that, I think is pretty cool. This tells a lot in a little amount of space.
I agree, and kind of to piggyback off of what you're saying, Sarah, is, we are a community school district, and this is literally showing everything that we do that entails our community, our students, our parents, showing the volunteer hours and everything that contributes to being a community school district, the buses, how far we're going, and just all that. It's just really cool.
Anything else? No? All right, well, that's the end of our meeting. Our next meeting will be back in the district office on September 17th for our business meeting. And the agenda currently are some out-of-state field trips, the PCSD Future Ready profile, and then the annual early college credit program and Start College Now program. We do need to move into a closed session tonight to discuss the superintendent contract for Wisconsin Statute 1985 1C. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to move into closed session.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second to move into closed session. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you all for coming tonight.